The sun had not yet broken the line of the ridge when Beau Rutledge stepped out onto the porch. A mug of yesterday's coffee in hand, steam rising faintly in the cold air. The sky hung heavy and pale, caught between night and morning. His boots crunched frostbitten dirt as he made his way to the edge of his property, intending only to check the line, same as always. Routine was all he had left. But this morning wasn't quiet. It was a sound, not wind, not coyote, a sound with desperation in it. Sharp, human, soft enough that most men would have missed it. Beau didn't. He followed it to the west fence post. The oldest one, where Ada once tied blue ribbon during planting season. It stood weathered, leaning like it too, had aged with loss. And at its base, nestled in a splintered basket lined with burlap, lay a baby. The child's face was flushed. With cold, her cheeks raw, as if the wind had kissed them too hard. Tiny fists waved uselessly in the air. Her eyes were squeezed shut in protest of everything. A torn scrap of paper was pinned to the rough wool covering her chest. Beau didn't read it at first. He just stood there, the air bit harder than usual. Not a single bird sang. The sun teased the horizon, but dared not rise yet. Beau looked down at the baby, then the sky, then the note. She's yours now. He stared at the words like they were written in blood. For a moment, he didn't move. His jaw locked, and the scar along his temple itched in the cold. His fingers twitched, aching to fold into fists. Then, slowly, as if he were lifting something made of glass, Beau knelt and gathered the child into his arms. She was light. Too light. He didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't pray. He just turned and walked back toward the cabin. Inside, the air was warmer, but barely. Ash sat gray in the hearth. The wood pile was low. The place smelled of old leather, cold coffee. In silence, Beau laid the baby down gently in the wicker basket he'd kept by the door since Ada passed. He knelt by the stove, lit the flame, and poured milk into the smallest tin cup he owned. He stirred, not knowing the right temperature, just guessing. When it was warm, he dipped a clean cloth and brought it to the child's lips. She whimpered, sucked, then quieted. The sound of her breathing filled the room like something sacred. Beau sat back on his heels and studied her, the tiny fingers, pale lashes, the tuft of dark hair pressed to her forehead. He did not recognize her. She had no trace of anyone he'd known, but still, the note's words kept ringing in his skull. She's yours now. He didn't know if that meant blood, or blame, or both. The baby let out a soft sigh and turned, slightly, her cheek brushing the edge of the wool. Just above her, swaying slightly from the draft, hung Ada's shawl, pale blue. Hand-stitched with mountain flowers, untouched since the day Ada was lowered into the earth. Beau looked at it. At the baby, and stood up, slow and stiff. He added logs to the fire, rubbed his hands together, and stared at the tiny shape in the basket. He didn't sit, didn't speak, but stood. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the hills, a hawk called, but the cabin held. He left the note on the table, waited by the edge of his empty mug. It would be a long morning. Longer still would be the next day. But the baby, for now, slept, warm, breathing, alive, beneath the shawl that once meant home. Beau, despite everything he had buried, did not put her back out on the porch. The days that followed passed in quiet defiance of what had changed. Beau rose before first light, same as always, stirred the fire, checked the fence, fed the mule, fetched water. Only now a cedar box rested beside the hearth, lined with bits of old cloth and rabbit fur, and inside it the baby slept. He hadn't given her a name, not yet. That felt like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He fed her warm milk, cleaned her with gentle hands he never used on anything else, and wrapped her tight like he'd seen Ada do with calves in their first snow. But still, in his mind, it was temporary, a fluke. It's a strange, cruel moment that would one day undo itself. He didn't build a cradle, didn't carve anything in the barn. The scent of old straw and rusted tools filled his nose as he stumbled upon a woven basket tucked. Behind the feed sacks, inside Ada's yarn lay brittle and dust-caked, the shawl she'd never finished still wrapped around half a spindle. For a moment, Bo reached for it to toss it into the burn barrel, but his fingers paused. He held the wool in his hand, soft though faded, and remembered Ada's humming. The way she used to pause mid-stitch to rub her thumb across her cheek, her smile crooked, her apron always too big. The barn suddenly felt full of her, not a ghost. Done. Just the quiet pressure of someone once deeply known. That night, the baby wouldn't settle. Her cries were sharp, too loud for a soul who weighed so little. Bo tried milk, rocking, hushes. Nothing worked. Then, without thought, he stepped to the peg by the cabin door and took down Ada's shawl. It still smelled of cedar, something womanly. Of her. He wrapped the baby in it. She settled almost instantly, breathing heavy against his chest. Sat in the rocker, creaking gently by the fire, and let the heat play across his boots. His eyes stayed fixed on the flame. But his mind drifted backward, to wheat-colored hair in morning light. To laughter in the kitchen. To the soft way Ada used to whisper his name when no one else was around to hear it. The fire burned low. Next morning brought visitors. Sheriff Tillman arrived on horseback, bootsteps hard on the frost. He didn't smile when he knocked. Mrs. Raleigh trailed behind him in a buggy, layered in wool, her face unreadable beneath a thick black bonnet. Churchwomen never came out this far unless they had something pointed to deliver. Bo opened the door, but did not step aside. "Morning," the sheriff said. "Heard something was found on your land." Bo didn't blink. "Coyote," he said. "Near the fence Yowlin took care of it." Mrs. Raleigh tilted her head. Folks said it sounded like a child crying. Bo's mouth tightened. "Probably heard the mule. Wind carries strange up here." The sheriff studied him, squinting slightly. Eyes drifting toward the faint sound inside, the slow creak of a rocking chair. Bo's heart thudded once, heavy. But the child made no sound. "You all right out here, Bo?" "Always am." A long pause passed like a rope pulled tight between them. Then the sheriff tipped his hat and turned to leave. Mrs. Raleigh lingered a moment longer, her eyes catching on the shawl hanging by the fire. The same one she'd helped Ada stitch on winter nights long gone. "She's been gone a year now," she said softly. "Some things are hard to bury." Bo didn't reply. He closed the door behind them. That evening, when the wind picked up and the stove spat smoke, Bo opened the old cedar box tucked in the loft. Inside were Ada's letters neatly bound in string, yellowed at the folds, some written when they were courting, others scrawled in the half-light of sickness. He took them to the fire, hand trembling, as he fed the first one into the flame. It caught slowly, then flared. The words curled into ash dot. He reached for the second. A gust of wind slipped down the chimney, scattering smoke across the room. The fire snapped, sputtered, dimmed. Bo coughed, stepped back. The second letter remained half-burned, its words blackened, but legible. He stared at it for a long time. The baby stirred in the basket. Ada's shawl shifted with her breath. Bo bent, took the half-burned letter from the hearth, and set it back in the cedar box. He tied the lid shut. Some shadows needed more time, and some refused to leave until you gave them something to carry. The sky turned white before the wind began. Snow didn't fall gently that far west. It arrived like punishment, thick and blinding. By midday, the light had dulled to a pale gray that clung to everything. Bo moved through the chores slower than usual, careful with the mule, protective of the fire. The baby had started to follow him with her eyes now. When he moved too far, she fussed. When he came near, her tiny hands reached for the folds of his shirt, like she expected something more than milk. He didn't know what to do with that kind of trust. By late afternoon, the wind howled hard enough to rattle the roof. Bo placed thick quilts around the windows, stuffed cloth under the door, and stirred the stew with a heavy hand. Outside, the ranch disappeared under a curtain of snow. He set more wood by the stove, filled the baby's bottle, and sat in the rocker to wait out the storm. That's when he saw it. A figure at the edge of the fence line swaying, barely upright, like a scarecrow come loose from the earth. Outline of a person wrapped in something tattered, fighting the wind with every step. Bo stood quickly, grabbing his coat and rifle. By the time he got to the porch, the figure had dropped to her knees near the same post where the baby had been. Left. He didn't hesitate. He ran. She was light as the baby had been boneless, all shiver. Her lips were split from cold, her fingers bloodless. One boot was missing. Her hair stuck to her cheek with ice. She didn't speak as he lifted her. She didn't even blink. Bo carried her through the door, careful not to startle the child, and laid her near the fire. He stripped off the wet layers and wrapped her in the heavy wool blanket from the cot. The rifle stayed within reach. He didn't know who she was, what she'd come for, or what followed her through that snow. Her eyes finally opened. They were dark, unreadable, but they locked onto the baby. Bo followed her gaze. The baby cooed from her box, warm, fed, small. Fingers gripping the edge of Ada's shawl. The woman didn't cry, but something in her cracked. Bo saw it in the way her shoulders dropped. Like something inside her finally let go. She didn't speak until much later, when Bo offered her broth and she sipped without thanks. "She your daughter?" Bo asked quietly. The woman shook her head, her lips parted. Then she whispered, "Her name's not mine to give." Bo didn't ask again. That night, as the storm screamed and the walls groaned, Bo stayed awake in the rocker, rifled across his lap, boots on the floor. The woman slept on the cot with one hand gripping the shawl now wrapped around her instead. Of the baby she'd asked for nothing, given nothing. But her presence filled the cabin like wet smoke impossible to ignore. The baby cried once. The woman stirred, then stilled. Whoa. Bo rocked gently, his eyes never leaving the fire. His fingers twitched on the rifle not from fear, but from something older. Protective, suspicious, curious. He hadn't shared a roof with another soul since Ada died. And now two slept within arm's reach, one too small to speak. The other, saying too little to understand by morning. The storm had buried the fence line. Bo opened the door and let the cold bite at his face. Nothing moved, not even the wind. Behind him, the fire popped and hissed. The woman had not stirred. Neither had the child. For a moment, standing there in the whiteness, Bo felt a strange kind of stillness settle into him, like something long, frozen inside his chest, had cracked, not melted, not thawed, just split enough to remind him it still lived. He stepped back inside, shut the door, and let the warmth find him again. The snow lingered longer than it should have, turning everything into a kind of muffled silence. Days passed without a full thaw. The fire stayed constant, and the baby, whose cries once startled Bo, had begun to settle when she heard Marin's footsteps cross the floor. She had not spoken much since that first night, offering nothing unless asked. Bo didn't push. He'd never been one for questions. Not even when he buried Ada, but after 3 days of watching Marin tend the child like she'd birthed her from memory, he finally said, without looking up from the cradle he was shaping, "Got a name?" She hesitated, then said Marin. That was all. She said it without pride or apology, as if it were borrowed, or to warn to mean much anymore. Later, over boiled potatoes and hard bread, he asked, "What are you running from?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the fire, but her voice came soft. Not running, escaping. He didn't say a word, just let her fill the quiet if she wanted. And she did, piece by piece. She'd worked for a settler family east of Dry Hollow. They took her in when she was barely a girl, used her hands, her back, her silence. Ouch. Slept in the barn, ate scraps. For years, she bore it. Then a man came, not young, but kind. A traveler with worn boots and stories that didn't sound like lies. He saw her, asked her name. Galder. Man, they met under trees. Whispered in the cellar. One night turned into 3. She found herself carrying something more than memory. Then someone saw them, claimed she'd lured him, accused him of something foul. He was hanged without a trial. She fled with the child still in her belly. Bo didn't speak, didn't flinch. He only reached for more firewood and stacked it by the hearth. He didn't say he understood, didn't offer comfort, just kept the room warm, the food coming, and the child safe. They fell into rhythm after that. Bo chopped wood, and mended fencing when the snow softened. Marin cleaned, cooked, folded Ada's shawls as though they were hers by inheritance. She watched the door often, not as if waiting for someone, but dreading what might come knocking, Bo noticed. Just like he noticed how she always held the baby like she might be taken away at any moment. Some nights were quiet, others the child woke, crying, fists flailing, lungs loud. Bo would try pacing, humming, feeding, but nothing worked. One night he passed the child to Marin, unsure what else to do. Marin took her gently, sat on the edge of the cot, and began to sing. The tune was nothing Bo recognized. It wasn't a hymn. It didn't rhyme. It wound like wind between trees, old and aching. The baby's cries softened almost instantly, her tiny fingers grasping at Marin's collarbone like she'd heard the song in the womb. Bo stood in the shadow of the doorway. Arms crossed, the fire cast a golden ring around them. Marin's eyes stayed on the child, but her voice seemed to travel far, like she was calling to someone long buried beneath. Snow, she finished the song without a word. The baby was asleep. The room was quiet. Bo went back to the rocker. He didn't sleep. The next morning, he found a single braid of yarn hanging on the cradle rail, Ada's yarn woven neatly into a loop. Marin didn't mention it, and neither did he outside. The ice began to break from the trees. Inside, the fire crackled. The baby cooed in her sleep. Bo looked at the child, then at Marin, who now moved through the cabin like she'd always belonged. He didn't trust what was forming between them, not fully, but something in his chest ached less. Still, he knew what the town would say if they found out. And he knew what the law had done to men kinder than him, women quieter than Marin. The world would not care about reasons, only that the child existed. Only that she had blood that didn't belong. Bo gripped the edge of the cradle, knuckles white. He didn't say it out loud. But he knew then this child hadn't been abandoned. She'd been delivered, and Marin hadn't run to escape. She'd run to protect. The fire burned steady through the night. The thaw came slowly, peeling away the snow-like skin from something reborn. It started with water dripping from the eaves, then mud forming beneath the porch boards. The creek, once a whisper under frost, began to speak again. The world didn't. Burst into spring. It sighed into it. Inside the cabin, nothing was named, but everything changed. Bo added new boards to the cabin wall where the cold had gotten through. Moran mended curtains that hadn't been touched in 2 years. She cooked better than he did, and he didn't pretend to mind. He built a bench for the porch. The brass lantern that hadn't been lit since Ada's last storm, the baby quiet, observant, yet ever-growing Zat now, with a steadiness in her eyes that made Bo wonder what she remembered. He hadn't meant to name her. The word had simply come one evening when she laughed at a wind chime Marin had tied with twine from the barn. The sound of it rang like music he didn't know he missed. He looked at the child giggling from her place on the quilt and said, "Lark." Marin stopped where she stood, her hands tightening around the tin bowl sheet. "Been drying." Her eyes filled, but no sound came. She turned to face the stove so Bo wouldn't see. He didn't comment, just said it again, quieter this time, "Lark." From that moment forward, the child had a name. They said little about it, just as they said little about the way they'd begun to share space without question. Sometimes Marin handed him coffee without asking. Sometimes Bo left her a folded shawl before she reached for one. At night, she took to sleeping on the cot with Lark curled into her side. Bo didn't correct it. The baby belonged in the center of it all now, not as a burden, but as something steadying. Bo had thought she'd broken the silence when she first arrived. Now he understood. She had filled it. The peace didn't last. Just afternoon on the first real warm day, Sheriff Tillman rode up the trail again. But he didn't come alone. Behind him rode Preacher Lowe, long-faced and solemn. And beside the wagon walked a thin woman in a stiff green coat, lips pressed like folded paper. Bo stepped out to meet them, rifle across his back more from habit than threat. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, his voice dry. "We got concerns." Town heard talk. The woman stepped forward. "That baby," She belongs to someone. Bo didn't blink. She does now. The preacher cleared his throat. The woman here says she heard tell of a child gone missing. From a settler's property downriver. Claims there was a servant girl half-blood. Ran off. Left the baby. Erin had come to the door by then, silent. Lark rested on her hip. She didn't say a word. The woman in green stared at her, nostrils flared. That's her. That's the girl. Bo moved without pause, stood between them. You say you know this child? He asked the woman. I know what I was told, she said. Then you don't know much. Marin stepped forward, her hand trembling as she passed Lark to Bo. She opened her mouth, her voice shaking. She's mine. I didn't abandon her. I gave her to someone who'd keep her breathing. The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster. Bo raised his voice, not loud but deep, sure. This child was left at my fence with a note that said she was mine. That's all I know, and all I'll answer for. Preacher Lowe narrowed his eyes. You're harboring I'm raising a girl who needs raising, Bo cut in. That's what I'm doing. No one moved. Then slowly the sheriff lowered his hand. You sure you want this, Bo? I'm sure. The preacher looked at the child, now resting her head against Bo's chest, then at Marin, who stood like stone. Finally he nodded once. The woman scoffed, but said nothing. They left without another word. That night Bo mounted the rifle above the mantel, not because he wanted a fight, but because he knew now what he'd protect. He didn't ask Marin to stay in the cabin that night. She didn't ask either. They simply moved around each other until the fire was low and the baby was asleep nestled. Between them, on a shared blanket, no words were spoken. But everything was said. The earth woke slow and steady like an old man stretching after a long sleep. The trees shook off their frost, buds peeking out like secrets no longer worth keeping. The creek behind the cabin ran clearer now, louder too, carving its voice back into the soil. Everywhere things stirred, things bloomed. Bo dug up the garden one morning without announcing it. The same patch Ada once kept, now overgrown and scattered with weeds that had held through 3 winters. Marin watched him from the porch, Lark toddling near her boots. The child pausing every few steps to marvel at ants or mud or sunlight. When the soil was turned, Marin joined him. Together they placed seeds in silent onions, beans, carrots, things that would last if they took root. Marin touched the ground like it was sacred. Bo didn't ask if she'd done this before, only handed her the seeds. That night, when Lark took her first steps without help, she walked from Bo to Marin as though it had always been the plan. Neither of them cheered. They simply watched her soft-eyed, the kind of awe that speaks louder when left unspoken. Carved the sign late the next day, when the baby was napping and the light outside burned gold. He worked slow, the way he did when it mattered. The name came to him like the wind natural, certain. Larkspur. A flower that grew from stone, that held color under frost. That bent in wind but never broke. He nailed it above the door before. Marin could ask what it meant. She didn't ask. But she looked at it for a long while, her hand brushing the frame as if testing the grain. The next morning, she stood by the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup not yet filled. Do you want me to stay? Bo didn't answer. He reached for the kettle, poured 2 mugs, and placed one in her hands. Marin smiled. Not big, not loud, just enough. She sat on the porch with Lark in her lap, the child's tiny fingers chasing dust motes. Bo joined them without a word, his shoulders easing as he sank into the bench. The wind blew, softer than it had in months. Far out on the trail, a rider appeared. Just a figure in the distance. No lawman's posture, no preacher's collar. Just a man heading east or west, unaware that anything had changed here. Bo stood not out of fear, but out of habit. He rested a hand on the post beside the door, not near the rifle, just near the place he'd mounted the sign. Larkspur. A home now. The traveler rode on without turning his head. Inside, the fire gave a quiet crack. The rocking chair creaked once, empty but ready. For the first time in years, Bo Rutledge felt something settle in his chest, not peace, not joy exactly. But wait. A good kind of wait. The kind a man chooses to carry. And in that moment, he knew. Family isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, something you hold, something you protect, long after the storm's passed.